Welcome, everyone. My name is Bianca. It's great to have you all here. I work with the MenEngage Alliance Global Secretariat as the Membership Engagement Coordinator. I'm very pleased to have you here for this peer learning session today with Stephen Botkin, where we'll be talking about best practices for training men to engage in gender equality. So, Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Bianca. Really appreciate your hosting this. I'm honored and excited to be here today with everyone. Thanks to the Global MenEngage Alliance for continuing to host these really unique and special gatherings of people from all around the world. I'm glimpsing some of the chat introductions and excited to see where we have gathered from. So before I begin my presentation, I'd like to ask us to take a deep breath together. I firmly believe that one of the central skills to practice in our work and in our lives is breathing more deeply. So I'm asking you to join me on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. That's for me as much as anybody else. Thank you for showing up here and in all the ways that you do in your life and in your work. I would love for you to identify yourself in the chat if you haven't. And if you have experiences with any of the trainings that we have conducted, please share something about what you learned in what you learned in those or about how it impacted you in the chat. We'll hear from some folks later in this session about their experiences, and I would love to encourage other people to share as well. So the structure for the session today is that I will share with you some of the history and theoretical foundations and lessons learned about our approach to training for about 30 minutes. We'll take then some time for questions and discussion. And after that, 4 colleagues from different countries will talk about their experiences of the methodology and the personal and professional impacts of the training. I'm really honored to have them join us, and that will be followed by another opportunity for questions and discussion. So that's the general game plan. Before I launch into the description of the journey of this training, a few caveats are important. First of all, our work has emerged from the historic and ongoing legacies of feminist women from many cultures who have given voice to the realities of gender and sexism and continue to fight for personal, institutional, and cultural change. And it's important for us to always give acknowledgement and gratitude for how their work and their feedback has informed and guided us over all these years. Secondly, we've used the term best practices in this session, not as a statement of rigorous evaluation research, but based on 40 years of reports from participants about changes in attitudes and behaviors and evidence from long-term relationships that these personal and collective transformations have created sustained ripple effects in their families and in communities. Another is that the world of gender consciousness has continued to undergo radical transformations over this period of time. And our theory of training and practice was developed from a binary gender framework. And as we come to understand better the realities of the transgender experiences, our models, our language, and our training designs continue to evolve. And we're still actively engaged in that process with gratitude, honestly. And then fourth, this training was and continues to be rooted in a collective experience. This is not just from me. Others around the world at the same time were developing programs for engaging men, and we fed each other in many ways. My specific designs emerged from the fertile collaborations with colleagues at the Social Justice Education Program at the University of Massachusetts, and was practiced and refined with fellow gender activists at the Men's Resource Center of Western Massachusetts. And some of those people are here with us today, which is a great honor. My friend and co-trainer of more than 20 years, James Arana, has been instrumental in the development and delivery of this training. We've traveled the world together, and our partnership has been central to the effectiveness of the training methodology. So again, this is not me in isolation. And finally, I'm condensing 40 years of theory and practice and trainings that last 3 days to 2 weeks into a half an hour presentation. So bear with me. I'll try not to go too quickly. There are many ways to tell the story and many stories to tell. So hopefully I'll remember to breathe through it all. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. The story of this training, like most good stories, begins with a very personal experience. It was 1979, and I was 25 years old. I had joined a men's support group to address my own experiences of childhood sexual abuse, my own developing emotional awareness, and my growing interest in feminism. Um, at the same year, I also began graduate studies in social justice education. And I discovered that there were other men, individually and in small groups, who were exploring how to apply feminist principles and practices to the male experience of gender. Some of these men were academics, and some were based in their community, creating groups and organizations for supporting men and or challenging men's violence. So this inspired my own focus in my graduate work on the question of how to apply the principles and practices of social justice education to developing male consciousness. And that became the title of my dissertation eventually. At the same time, I began conversations, with local men about how we could support men and challenge men's violence in our own community. And this combination of the academic inquiry and the practical applications was really a perfect balance for developing an approach to engaging men that is grounded both in educational theory and community-based practice. So in graduate school, I was working with faculty and fellow students to develop a educational methodology for increasing awareness about social identities and oppression, for changing attitudes and behaviors that were rooted in oppression and developing a more liberated and empowered identities. And we studied and practiced a methodology called popular education, which was based on the active engagement in participants in our own learning about how oppression has impacted our lives. And popular education was differentiated from what banking education, where a teacher deposits information into the students, and then the students are expected to memorize and repeat back this information. And popular education strategies and skills, which are probably familiar to many of us, were things like creating norms of safety and respect for all participants to be able to share their own personal stories, and using dialogue for reflecting together about shared experiences and raising our consciousness about how oppression has impacted our lives, and connecting personal experiences to social problems, and bringing attention to group dynamics to learn how to recognize and interrupt patterns of oppression. And you often used integrating emotional and body-centered experiences into the learning process. And so the idea was that by working together with people from our own communities, we could develop strategies for action to liberate ourselves from the patterns of oppression inside our own selves and in our communities. And so that was the basis of the methodology. At the same time, as these graduate school activities were going on, my conversations with local men, whoops, I seem to have jumped a slide here. There we go. Helped us to focus on helping men to connect with each other. We understood that connection, or the lack of it, was central to the damages that men experience and perpetuate. And women from local women's centers had encouraged us to work with other men. So at first we called ourselves the Men's Resource Connection because connection was such an important theme. And we facilitated the formation of men's support groups. We conducted retreats and workshops, and we organized social events where men could learn to feel safe and vulnerable with each other. We also organized and participated in public events where men could collectively express our commitment to ending violence, challenging homophobia, and promoting peace. After several years we realized that the work we were doing would benefit from a more formal organizational structure. And in 1988, we incorporated the Men's Resource Center of Western Massachusetts. And our mission was to support men, challenge men's violence, and develop men's leadership in ending oppression. And we proudly stated that the MRC is a male positive, pro-feminist, gay affirmative, and anti-racist organization. Within the MRC, we led support groups, a batterer intervention program, groups for men who identified as gay, bisexual, or questioning, groups for men who are survivors of childhood abuse, and a group for young men of color. And we developed an approach that we called compassionate confrontation, combining supporting men and challenging men's violence. And we partnered with, sorry, I lost my place here. We partnered with local women's centers on events and awareness campaigns. And we produced a monthly newsletter that eventually became Voicemail Magazine, which is now a wonderful international publication, which I recommend to you all. So based on these community experiences at the MRC and the lessons from the graduate school experiences, we gradually developed a set of foundational beliefs about men and gender and a model of male socialization that would guide the design and delivery of our trainings locally and around the world. And I just want to go through them with you briefly because they are core to how we approach our training work. And the first one is boys are born naturally loving, caring, and sensitive. And this is really important to us because we think it's critical to tell the story about boys and men from the beginning, you know, how we come into this world, and that we are trained in a way to be masculine in a way that leads to things like domination and violence, and as well as disconnection and confusion. And that boys, as well as all human beings, have been traumatized by violence and abuse as victims and as witnesses. And it comes to us in lots of different ways for lots of different reasons. And then we say that men are both privileged and damaged by masculinity and violence. And then we go on to recognize that violence and domination are used by men to control feelings of fear and vulnerability, and also to protect our privileges. And then finally, we have the vision part of our beliefs, which is that men are actually eager to reclaim our natural caring and hungry for reconnection, and that we can become role models for positive masculinity and agents of change in our families and communities. And that as partners with people of all genders, men can play an important role in this work that we're doing. So those are, we say those loudly and proudly because we think that sets the tone for the training work that we do. As the Men's Resource Center programs continue to expand in scope and recognition, people from other places around the world began contacting us, wanting to learn about our approach. And this is a group of visitors from Japan. And we started to realize that all around the world, there were men who were eager to learn how to support women and end violence. And that, in fact, all around the world, there were women who were eager to welcome men as partners in the struggle for gender equality and nonviolence. And we formed, in order to respond to this need that was showing itself, we organized Men's Resources International, which was to build the capacity for training and consulting. And the goals of our training were to create, our mission was to mobilize networks of men allied with women for violence prevention and positive masculinity. And we had a vision as we formed. Our vision was a global network of women and men working together for unity and peace in our families and communities. This was in 2004. And it was exactly at the same time that MenEngage was being formed, which was really interesting because MenEngage really embodied that vision that we in this small group were lifting up. And when we realized that MenEngage was going to do that mission really well, we were very happy. So, the goals for our training was to help men move along in stages of engagement. And we recognized that the men who we will be working with would be in different places on those stages of change. And we wanted a theory and practice that we could use to help men in different places become more aware, start to change attitudes and behaviors, engage with others in their community to create advocacy and organizations that could carry that work forward. And the big question that we had was, does the work and the theory and the practice that we were developing at the Men's Resource Center in our part of the United States, does it have cross-cultural relevance? Would it be effective in other contexts and communities? And so we started to see if we could articulate what were the critical ingredients in this theory and practice of training. And I'll just go through them briefly with you. Each of them deserves a lot more attention. We recognized that it was critical to engage men in the context of their families and their communities, and to engage at the same time that we were engaging men, to engage women right from the very beginning as advisors and participants and accountability partners in any of the trainings that we would be doing. As you saw in the beliefs, we thought it was very important to affirm the possibility of healthy masculinities and healthy male role models, and to create a welcoming environment for everyone to reflect on their experiences with masculinity. And an interesting note is that at the Men's Resource Center, a lot of our focus was on creating men's groups where men could work together. And when we started doing the international training and consulting, we really shifted to a model of cross-gender dialogue and engaging women and men collectively in the experience of reflecting on our experiences of masculinity, because it's impacted all of us. And it's important for women and men to be together in having those conversations. We also used separate gendered groups as well. We thought it was critical in our training to model compassionate responses to all thoughts and feelings, and to model how to have curiosity and questions about harmful attitudes and behaviors. As I said before, telling the story about men and masculinity from the beginning, the inherent humanity that boys and men are born with, is important in the training. And in the training, we offered a model or a framework for understanding how male socialization trains boys into patterns of unhealthy and harmful masculinity, so that people could see that it made sense how we got to where we are. It didn't come out of nowhere. We would identify the advantages and disadvantages to men of the stereotypical masculinity and the impacts that masculinity has on everyone. We would teach men how to break the silence, which is a phrase that women have, given to us about violence, is that how important it is to break the silence, and to teach men how to break the silence about our own experiences with violence, whether that's as victims, as witnesses, as perpetrators, and as agents of change. As I said, we would teach and practice cross-gender dialogue, and a critical part of that was teaching men how to listen to women, which was often really a radical and transformative experience for everyone. It was important to develop and talk about new definitions of power, because a lot of our understanding of power has been from the way that power gets used in oppressive ways. But I think that when we can offer alternative understandings of power, as in, for example, connection, that helps people to see that being powerful is not a bad thing. It's the kind of power that we're ending up using. And you can see the others. The last one I'll mention right now is that it was important in our training not only to do training that went into people's heads, but also people's hearts and spirits, and that we would engage the body and bring curiosity and gratitude and joy to our work. So that's a lot of heady stuff. This is the model that we use for mapping out how the male socialization process happens, and it's kind of a simple story that we tell from the beginning, which is how we are born, in the middle, to the experiences of violence and trauma, the feelings of powerlessness, the man box that gives us a way to feel powerful, and the results of that man box, which are domination and isolation. There's a lot to be said there, but I'm going to keep moving forward. This is a example of one of the core activities that we use. We call it unpacking the man box. We ask people to stand up and take a physical pose for what the idea of a stereotypical man looks like. And then we do a brainstorm, asking people to say what comes to mind when they hear the words "be a man." And then we do an analysis of that man box, and we ask 4 questions, and they're about the advantages and disadvantages of being in the box and of getting out of the box. And that process of doing a collective analysis, really, people regularly talk about how important that is for raising their awareness about this thing we call masculinity. So we started then doing trainings, and some of those trainings were right in our own local community in Western Massachusetts in the US. And out of those trainings locally, an organization got formed called the Men of Color Health Awareness in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts. And that organization, which was formed probably 15 or more years ago, is still vital in the community. And some of those mentors are still leading sessions and bringing in new cohorts of men. It's been embraced by the city as an important health promotion organization. Other men's centers started to get formed, modeling themselves on the Men's Resource Center. This is a picture of 3 of those men's centers gathering together. And we will have, hopefully, our friend and colleague Emiliano speak a little bit about his experience of forming the Men's Resource Center of South Texas with support and training from Men's Resources International. And then we got invited to do a training in Zambia. This was the first international training that we did, and we had the big question: would the methodology work in an African context? This training was sponsored by the YWCA of Zambia, and there were women and men in the training together. And as a result of that training, the Zambia Men's Network was formed. And then our dear friend and colleague, Chief Ugo Nachi, who is joining here with us today from Nigeria, learned about the MRI training, and she invited us to Nigeria to lead a training there for her community of women and men. And it was a very profound and powerful experience. And out of we engaged with community leaders, the traditional rulers who were participating, and really amazed us in standing up at the end of the training and talking about how they were going to speak to their communities. And the Ebony Men's Resource Center was formed. At that training, a young man from Rwanda had contacted us and said, "Can I come to you? I'm really interested in your training, and can I come to your training?" And we invited him to join us in Nigeria. He came to the training. At the end of the training, he stood up and says, "I'm going to go back home and I'm going to start the Rwanda Men's Resource Center." And lo and behold, uh, the Rwanda Men's Resource Center was formed. He invited us to Rwanda. We've done a series of foundational trainings for that organization. And as many of you know, it is now a real model of what an organization like that can look like. We did training of trainers in Rwanda, and they went to their communities and worked with their communities and developed action plans. They had community gatherings where women and men could model standing together side by side as equal partners, and that was certainly eye-opening. Actually, just a few months ago, Fidel invited us back to do another training of trainers with his staff and partners in Rwanda, and Ugo joined us there, as you can see. Um, so I'm just going to keep showing you pictures of the trainings in different settings, because it's really, for us, it's really exciting to look back and see all the different contexts and all the outcomes that have happened. This was Liberia. We worked with the IRC in creating a male involvement project. And we engaged directly with women's groups to help to listen to what they had to say about what they wanted from the men in their communities. And then we would meet with men's groups, and we worked with the Ministry of Gender and Development, helping promote positive images that they would proudly wear or share. This is a picture of men learning how to listen to women in the Palava, the peace huts that they have there. And this is a beautiful story with, after the training, the women said to the men, the men said, how can we help? And the women said, well, we would like to build a women's center. And the men said, well, sure, let's do it. And they built this women's center, Chocolate City Women's Center. And one of the women made matching outfits for everybody, and they were really excited to have, this was the opening of the Women's Center. The women's and men's action groups gathered from around the country. They pledged their commitment to gender equality, and they launched a national campaign called Mapeva, Men as Partners in Ending Violence Against Women. And in total, the IRC estimated over 5,000 Liberians participated in campaign activities all around the country. It was pretty exciting. We wanted to know what the impacts were, so we followed up and met with women's groups and asked them, what did they see as a result of all of this? And what they said, at least in part, was Liberian men are stepping out of the box. And this is a picture of men doing something that might not be traditional in many contexts. We also did trainings in Cote d'Ivoire, and engaged with the local chiefs and village leaders. There's a international organization called the Women's Peacemakers Program, and they contacted us and asked us if we would co-facilitate an international training of trainers. And then they invited 19 men from 17 different countries to participate in 2 weeks of training, and then a follow-up. That was in the Netherlands, and then a follow-up 2 weeks of training and action planning and sharing in the Philippines. Two of the men from this group are here with us today, and we'll hear from them shortly about the experiences there. Other contexts, you might recognize one of these people, is we did a training in Nepal for representatives from 7 countries from South Asia. We did trainings in Niger and Mali. We were invited to work with the UN Women in Albania to develop a national action plan. And so we did trainings for folks in Albania as a basis for working together to develop that action plan. This was a training in Myanmar with CARE, working in particular to engage men to prevent GBV against migrant women and sex workers in Myanmar. And we went back and did a training of trainers the following year. Now, this was a project that we did with representatives from DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi, the Great Lakes region in Africa, creating a project called Women and Men as Partners in Peace Building. These are some other ways in which our training has been used. I'm going to keep rolling forward. And the Global MenEngage Alliance formed, and it was very exciting for us to see this level of international organizing and development, and we were eager to continue to participate in that. Over time, the Men's Resource Center and Men's Resources International joined together, and we created Merge for Equality. Merge for Equality is still operating. It has a very specific focus now, with the theme of addressing male socialization at its earliest stages. And so we wanted to figure out how to reach out to early childhood educators and caregivers to help them to think about ways to raise healthy boys, because a lot of people in those roles come into that work with more traditional or stereotypical images of what it means to be a boy or a man, and really are very happy to expand their understanding about how they can support boys in becoming healthy and peaceful, nonviolent human beings. So then Merge for Equality joined with the North America MenEngage Network. So Merge for Equality now is a program within the North America MenEngage Network, just to bring you up to date on the evolution of these organizations. I have listed here with links a number, and I hope you'll be able to have those links when the slides are shared, because there's a bunch of handouts here, some of which I've gone over today and others which are different. Then there's some case studies about the Nigeria work and the Rwanda work and the Liberia work. And then there's an evaluation of the Women's Peacemakers Program training of trainers document there. And then there's some video documentation that is interesting to note. There's me talking about what you probably have heard now. There's a video about the Men's Resource Center, a video about the Women's Peacemakers Program training, a video about the recent training for ROMREC. There's a video about the Men of Color Health Awareness, and a Merge video. So there's lots of goodies there to look at. My mouth is getting dry, and so I'm going to say thank you, and see if my friend and colleague James is on with us. And if you are, James, I would just ask you to see if you have anything you want to add to this whirlwind tour that I just did.
I don't have anything to add, except for how great a journey to have been part of this team of supporting our brothers and sisters to find ways of creating more loving, caring, supporting, and affirming relationships through intentional practice of paying attention. You've done a great job, and it's a pleasure to be part of the team.
Thank you, James. You don't know how powerful it is for James and I standing side by side to be doing this work together. For us personally, and also for participants to witness us, working together as co-facilitators. So always happy to be with you. So let's take a pause and see if there are questions or comments. And then we'll hear from Emiliano, from Ugo, from Babar, and from Paulo about a little bit about their experiences with the training and the impacts.
First question that came was are you using gender as a euphemism for sex, or gender as the social construct and performance of masculine and feminine stereotypes? That's question one. And the next one is, I would love to understand the methodology for activities on teaching men to listen to women. This is so crucial, especially for senior managers who don't understand the issues. And then what do you mean by engage the body? There are two more. Do you want to start with those three and then, or?
Sure. Yeah, my short-term memory is probably can hold those three. Yeah, gender is really what we're talking about, the socialized experience of gender. And the listening to women is really a delightful and ongoing practice. And I think it is important to approach it with delight and to model what that looks, what that looks like and feels like, to be delighted to listen to women. And we teach listening right from the very beginning of our training. One of the very first activities that we do is first we ask people what they know about good listening skills, and we'll brainstorm all the things that demonstrate good listening skills. And then we ask people to pair up with somebody else, and that for each of them to take 3 minutes to share what their earliest memory of boys and girls, women and men being treated differently is. So their earliest memory of boys and girls being treated differently because they're boys and girls. And we structure it very specifically, where we say there's going to be 3 minutes where one of you is going to be the speaker and one of you is going to be the listener. And the listener listens and the speaker speaks. And so the listener doesn't say anything, you just demonstrate good listening. And then we'll tell you when it's time to switch. And it's highly structured so that people really focus on practicing what listening looks like and feels like. And then we use that as the basis for other activities where there's listening going on. And in many of our trainings, we will have women, a time where women will be speaking and men will be listening. And we will remind people about what listening means, which means, no talking, no eye rolling, no, gestures. And we will, after the listening to women period, we will ask the men to reflect on what they heard. And we will be very structured about that. It's not an interpretation. It's not a response. It's very specifically, what did you hear the women saying? And then we will ask the women, do you feel like the men heard you? And if there's something missing, what else do you want them to hear? And then we will go back to the men and say, so what did you now hear the women say that they want you to hear? And we will repeat that process until the women say, yes, we feel heard. And it's a beautiful process. And honestly, what we at the end, when we're debriefing, many men say, we've never listened, we've never heard, we never understood, we never really heard what you were saying. And the women are sort of aghast, because they were like, we've been saying this all along. But the women also reported that the experience of feeling heard in that very direct and simple way was really important to them. So that's some of the detail of how we do some of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that in detail. It sounds like a wonderful activity. Thank you.
You're welcome, Lucy. The last question was about body-centered, engaging the body. The most obvious example, firstly, using the breath is always something that we do, beginning and ending and middle and throughout. We remind and encourage people to breathe, because that is the most direct way to embody our experience, literally. And the activity where we get people standing up and taking a pose, we call it the man pose activity, is a physical embodiment of the stereotypical masculinity. And we ask people to hold that pose for a little while and notice when they look around the room, what they're noticing. And when they pay attention to how it feels in their body, what are they noticing? And that is another example of an activity that does direct embodiment.
Thanks, Stephen. So there's a bunch more questions.
I'd like to pause. I know there's going to be a million questions, and again, this is the kind of conversation that we can start to get into when we have 3 days or a week or 2 weeks to do this. But I do want to give time for my guests and colleagues to speak, and so I'd like to move to that now, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for a little bit more questions. The first person will be our friend Ugo, and Ugo has recorded a message here, and if that's okay.
My name is Chief Mrs. Ugo Nachi.
Great.
I'm the Executive Director of Daughters of Virtue and Empowerment Initiative, a women's safety and empowerment organization based in Abakaliki, Ebonyi State, Nigeria. I'm very delighted to be part of this activity organized by MenEngage Alliance and UN Women. I'm also happy and feel honored to be invited by Stephen to share our experiences pertaining to the work that he's been doing around the world for several years. I came in contact with Stephen in 2006 at the UN Women Commission on the Status of Women conference held in New York. And it was at a side event where Stephen was sharing information about engaging men in eliminating gender-based violence. Because actually I come from a patriarchal setting where voices of women are stifled, their voices not heard so much, their voices in whispers. Actually, I decided to be part of that training, and I liked actually what I heard. And after that, I sent a mail to Stephen inviting him to Ebonyi State, which he willingly obliged. Came to Ebonyi State late 2006 with his team. And that was how we organized the first ever international training on engaging men in eliminating gender-based violence. That was the first time that I came in contact with the workbook that he uses for his trainings. And it was so amazing how everybody who participated in that training, resonated with it. I also want to say that participants did not just come from Ebonyi State. Some of us came from Rwanda, some from Zambia, from the United States, and Nigeria. And all the participants benefited so much, from the training on how men can engage effectively to ensure that women are given their right of place and protected from all forms of harm. So that training actually changed the trajectory of my life and strengthened my resolve to advocate for women and girls, using men as allies. As the Executive Director of DoveNet, I'm well positioned to engage with men on issues of gender equality, women's rights, violence prevention, and developing positive masculinity. It is when we're able to do this, the women, we have a better and healthier society. The methodology adopted for this training is novel, and it's very interactive and presents a way that resonates with the participants. The training made me to understand that it is possible for men to step out of the man box. The training, treats properly the issue of the man box and how men can take themselves out of it and lead happier and healthier lives. So being a man is not, they don't use their strengths to hit anybody. Even with their strengths, they can also show some level of compassion. So the training impacted so much on me. I am recognized as a champion on male engagement. The training had a way of producing a calmer personality who is respected and called upon on all issues, relating to male engagement. The lessons and skills learned is being utilized even in my own office that most of our activities that has to do with community engagement, we ensure that we have male involvement, and it's yielding a lot of results. I look forward to sharing the content of the handbook to many more men and women. And I thank you, Stephen, and your great team for the impact that you have made in many countries, including Nigeria. Thank you very much. I will look forward to seeing you someday.
Thank you, Ugo. We're going to have each of the people speak, and then we'll have a chance for some questions and comments. Emiliano, are you here with us?
I am here, Stephen. Happy to be with you.
Excellent. Emiliano Diaz de Leon is a men's engagement specialist at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault in the U.S. Welcome. Thank you for being willing to share a little bit about your experiences with the training.
So good to be with you and all of you from around the world. Thank you so much, Stephen, for the invitation and for the opportunity to share my experience with you and Men's Resources International. Greetings from Austin, Texas, here in the United States. My name is Emiliano Diaz de Leon. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the men's engagement specialist here at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. We are the statewide coalition that addresses sexual violence, advocacy, and prevention here in the state of Texas, here in the United States. And I am here because of Stephen. Stephen is a longtime mentor of mine, and ultimately the work of the Men's Resource Center is really what influenced me and really propelled me to do the work at a statewide level here in Texas. And so that work started for me decades ago, almost 3 decades ago, when I connected with the folks at the Men's Resource Center of Northern New Mexico, and really learned about the Men's Resource Center. I had never heard of the Men's Resource Center in terms of the model and the work that they were doing, but that was sort of based on the Men's Resource Center of Northern New Mexico was really based on the work of the Men's Resource Center in Western Mass. And so I was just really inspired and excited about this particular model, which really resonated with me, and was inspired to create a Men's Resource Center in South Texas. And so specifically in Harlingen, which is on the border between Texas and Mexico. And I'm sure many of you around the world are hearing about the crisis along that border. And so my partner is originally from Harlingen. I grew up here in Austin, Texas, and followed her down to South Texas. And I think somebody asked about machismo, right? In the comments, and I think I was looking for ways to take the lessons that I had learned from the folks in New Mexico and really establish a Men's Resource Center in South Texas and begin engaging boys and men along the border. And so the Men's Resource Center of South Texas was formed with a very simple mission of supporting men's journeys as they challenge violence and oppression, really based on that model that the folks in that Stephen and the folks in Western Massachusetts had developed. And really, you know, when Stephen's talking about the history of the Men's Resource Center, we just really modeled providing the same sort of services, programs, activities for boys and men in South Texas around engaging in these hard conversations around gender inequality, sexism, patriarchy, machismo, really thinking about ways that we could end all forms of gender-based violence in our community. And we begin organizing, really reaching out to men who look like me, right? And I think that was a really important, that there had never been, women had been doing the work in South Texas of organizing, providing services, raising awareness about interpersonal violence. There's an amazing network of domestic violence and sexual assault centers along the border, and they've been doing phenomenal work for the last 40 years. But I think in terms of partnering with them and really looking at ways to engage the boys and men in their community, the Men's Resource Center model really made sense to me. And we began to incorporate the methodology and some of the lessons that we had learned from our friends at the Men's Resource Center of Northern New Mexico. So that led me to Stephen. And Stephen at that point became an important mentor in my life, both personally and professionally, in terms of really, Stephen embodies this methodology. I think, one of the things that I've learned from Stephen in terms of the way that you see him here is, one of the things that I admire and that I try to replicate in my own personal life as well as in my professional life. And I wanted to bring that to folks in South Texas. And so we began organizing in the early 2000s and established the Men's Resource Center of South Texas. And we're very fortunate to bring Stephen to provide training to this very small group of folks, both men and women who were, who were ready to do the work, ready to continue to organize. We had already established ourselves as a nonprofit organization in South Texas. We had already begun providing some programming and some service, some activities of educating boys and men in the community around these issues, creating support groups for all kinds of male identified folks. And so we really looked to Stephen in terms of really imparting the lessons that he had learned, at the Men's Resource Center. And so he was very gracious to come to South Texas and spend some time with us and impart those lessons and provide this really important training to our folks who were really new to the work, right? And I think that was an important opportunity for us to build community and connection, not just to the work that was happening in South Texas, but to the work that was happening around the world. And so Stephen was that connection for us and really imparted some really important lessons that we embedded into our work and continued to, again, model all of our efforts based on the work of the Men's Resource Center. And so that was hugely successful. I think folks really left feeling very inspired, very energized, and feeling like they had the tools from that particular training. I know I did. It was profound for me because I had already connected with Stephen. We were already engaged in conversations. I had spent some time with him in both in Taos, New Mexico, as well as in Amherst, Massachusetts. So there was a lot of really important relationship building that Stephen brought to us in South Texas. I think the everything that Stephen is talking about today is part of who I am. I cannot separate the work that I do, the model that I derive. All my work here in Texas continues to come from those lessons that I learned in that training from Stephen in the Men's Resource Center, from James and all the folks at the Men's Resources International. I think that I want to embody that work, and for me, that is the work, and I continue to impart those lessons that I learned from Stephen and from James to the folks that I work with on a daily basis here in Texas, who are organizing and engaging men around the state of Texas around the issues of sexual violence prevention and other forms of gender-based violence. And so those lessons, that legacy lives on, right? So I'm really grateful to Stephen and to the Men's Resource Center for those important lessons, for giving me the tools, for giving me the resources, for inspiring me, for motivating me to continue to do the work. And so unfortunately, the Men's Resource Center of South Texas no longer exists, but the folks who were engaged, who were impacted by the work, by our mission of the Men's Resource Center in South Texas, 16 years ago when I left South Texas to come back to Austin to work at the coalition, those folks continue to do the work in their own lives, in their organizations, in their institutions, with their family and their friends. I remain in contact with all those folks in South Texas who were part of the Men's Resource Center, who are part of that network throughout the border, from El Paso all the way to Brownsville, who are still engaged in that work, right? Who are organizing men, who are engaging them in these conversations, who are trying to transform our community and ultimately end all forms of gender-based violence. So I think, again, that legacy is going to live on long beyond me or beyond Stephen, in terms of the people who were really impacted by this model. So again, thank you, Stephen, for the opportunity to share that experience. I mean, I think ultimately, it's profound for me in terms of my own relationship with my partner. I have a 14-year-old son who impart those lessons that I learned from Stephen and all the folks, the men and women who have been engaged in this work for many years before me, and I hope that he carries that forward as well. So Thank you, Stephen, and thank you all for the important work that you do around the world around this particular issue of engaging boys and men. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Emiliano. What a powerful testimonial. Appreciate you very much. So now we're going to hear from a colleague and friend in Pakistan, Babar Bashir, who is a managing director at a women's and child rights organization in Pakistan. And Babar was one of the participants in the Women's Peacemakers Program training. So thank you for being here, Babar.
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you so much, all the friends from MenEngage. I can see Lakshman is there. I think, of course, he has been a kind of a source of motivation for all of us. So I think the kind of background I'm coming from, it was 2009 when I first time met Steve. And as Steve was referring to, there was a TOT, training of trainers, where we were around 19 men from around, around 19 countries. So the kind of context I was coming from, I was doing a lot of work with men in uniform. I think when I say men in uniform, it's basically a lot of work with the police, actually. And with police around issues of men and masculinity, gender-based violence against women. And we were also doing a lot of work with the organization I'm associated with, Rosen, around the response perspective, basically. So we're just trying to figure out like how we can strengthen the work around the prevention side as well when it comes to the issues of gender-based violence. So in that context, I think that the connection, again, this is a very specific word. And I think I can see the kind of a smile on Steve's face, because this word has a very specific meaning for all those men who were part of that training, actually, because that training was in Netherlands, and in Dutch, I think this is the word that is used for the connection that we mostly see in English as well. So this whole thing, and then the third card, which is also very, very important for me, is the issue of self-awareness, because I think these were the two main connections that really helped me to see like how to place the work that I am doing already in Pakistan and the kind of approach that Steve is bringing into my work, actually. So these two whole concepts actually really, I would say, change the whole idea, like how to work with men and boys specifically in terms of preventing violence in context of Pakistan, basically. So in 2009, when we met, so the first task, was for me like, okay, what to do with this whole training, because it was 2 weeks of training, and then I went for a kind of a follow-up training in 2010 as well. So from that perspective, we started working with a group of 100 men and young boys in Pakistan, basically. And these men and young 100 boys were basically, the idea was like how to engage with them specifically in terms of exploring their own experiences of how they are socialized and how they become men and boys in our context, basically. And here comes the idea of when I was talking about the male socialization process, basically, because the male socialization is the whole idea that we used in a mental health perspective in our training when I was talking about the issue of self-awareness, like, because the idea was like not to talking about something out there, but okay, let's see something inside, actually. Like, okay, as men, as boys, how we place ourselves in this whole discourse around. So not coming from a very savior complex, like, okay, we are the men and we are going to save the world and we are the protector and we are the breadwinners. But okay, fine, these are all kind of the expectations that the society associate with men. But okay, let's place your own self. What is the cost of that, basically? And here I think it is very, very important just to refer to the exercise that Steve was by and again referring to, the Be a Man exercise, actually. I think this is a very powerful exercise because I did exercise across Pakistan with hundreds of men and boys, with mixed groups, with separate groups. And that exercise has its own kind of a very special meaning, I would say, basically. It has two impacts, basically. One, many times, as we used to say, like, okay, it becomes a little bit difficult for men and boys to look at their privileges actually. So how to make those privileges visible in terms of when we talk about, okay, be a man actually, but at the same time looking at the cost they pay to be a man actually, basically. So this whole process of visualization of being a man, I think that's something that was very, very powerful. And the third aspect that I found very effective in this be a man exercise was the multiplicity. Because in my context, many times when we talk about masculinity, it seems like, okay, this is one form of masculinity. So there's only one way of being a man. And this whole exercise actually unpack the whole idea, like, okay, how different forms of masculinities do exist. And then as Steve was referring to, because this exercise is done in a circle where all the participants make a pose against this statement like be a man, and then just once they open up their eyes and see, okay, what is around them, and explaining that why that kind of posture I made, basically. For instance, if I made the posture of very like a strong macho man, and in another way I'm just standing in a very simple way, so what does it actually mean to me, basically? So this whole idea actually really gives a kind of understanding, like, okay, how important it is to just not looking this whole discussion and discourse of masculinities and from a very linear perspective and a unitary perspective, but from a very kind of a very multiplicity perspective as well, basically. So this thing, I think, just to give you another example, like very recently, I said, I worked with hundreds of men and boys around in Pakistan in terms of trainings, in terms of running fellowships. So some of the reflections, like I give you, last month I was doing a training, and there was one of our participants. He was, around 30 plus man, and during the lunch, he just came to me and said, okay, I just wanted to talk to you. And I said, okay, let me talk about that. And I said, okay, the idea is like I'm listening to you for the last 2-3 days, but I'm a man and I have 4 sisters, and it is very, very difficult for me just to say, okay, in my context, say that I can't afford the kind of expectations that whole the society is having from me, being a brother of 4 sisters, actually, basically. In my context, it's a kind of a huge kind of a responsibility that a man has to take on. But I do not find any courage to say to my family that this is beyond my limitations, basically. But having all the discussion right now, I feel like, okay, this is okay. This is okay for me. Go to my family and say, okay, this is something that is not possible for me, and the kind of a cost I am actually paying for whole this idea. So just to give a reflection, like how this whole idea, when it starts from your own self, like where you place your self-awareness processes and see, okay, what kind of a connection I have with the people around me, and then the larger context that really help people to understand like how important it is to just talk about this whole, the way we are socialized and men and boys, basically. The last point I think just wanted to say about is like the kind of experiences that are very different from working with young men and experiences from the senior men, basically. I think I was just listening to one of the questions where it was asked, like, how was the experience with senior men, actually? So my experience is really very difficult to work with senior men because of, I mean, this can be many reasons. In my context, one of the major reason is the issue of listening, actually. I mean, this is really a very big issue. Like, they're really not ready to listen, basically. And the kind of whatsoever their socialization and blocks has been. But working with young men and boys, I think it has been a really wonderful experience for me. I would say it has been a kind of a rewarding experience because I see a lot of good stories, a kind of experience, the kind of messages that I receive from those men and young boys, like what they are doing in their not only in the immediate relationships, but in the community as well, basically. So the idea is like only like the kind of a changes at the individual level that are very, very important, but at the interest, it's equally important to see like how these men and boys are creating impact in their communities where they live in, for instance. And they're very small, for instance, because we do a lot of work on child sexual abuse. So the kind of stand they take up and the kind of support they provide to the survivors' family, the way they approach the police, like, okay, this is the case. So the idea is like, it's not only a kind of something very individual, which is very, very important, but at the same time, this whole approach, I think, has brought a kind of a good impact at the community level as well. And the last point, I think there was a kind of a question around like, oh, how important it is to work with institutions as well. As they started from the very beginning, like I did a lot of work with the police institution in Pakistan, and with this approach, like where these policemen actually place themselves as individuals first time and reflect on their own processes actually, basically. And reflecting on their processes, like how they are socialized as a male, and then how they connect to the system they work in. And at the same time, yes, as individuals, they can make a change in that system as well, basically. And I see, Fasil, just to give you an example, because of all these processes, a lot of work has been done in police in Pakistan just to increase the number of women. Like I know where many of the trainees who are part of that and now at the senior level, they have made policies like, okay, how important it is to include more women in the police in Pakistan faster. So my idea, like, yes, if you work with an individual, it did bring a change at the institution level as well. But of course, it becomes a little bit tricky as well because institutions co-opt the whole idea. But at the same time, there are good individuals and kind of a champions who listen to you and they bring a change in the institution as well. Just to conclude, I think the kind of my reflections, I would just show you how important this. Again, Steve, a lot of smile. You can see this is this small symbolic piece actually has a lot of. You can see a lot of messages. These are the messages from all the 20 men who were part of that training, and this is with me for the last 14 years, 15 years. And this is the connection actually I feel with this whole symbolically as well as in terms of like in materially as well, because this has brought a lot of change in me as an individual, but at the same time, the kind of work I'm doing for the last 25 years. So Rosen, the organization I belong to, is 25th anniversary we are celebrating this year. It's a national NGO. We did a lot of work around this researches and a lot of work around training from the perspective of response as well from the perspective of prevention as well. So please, I would really invite my friends to visit our website, rosen.org, and we will find a lot of materials over there, the kind of work we have done for the last 25 years. So thank you so much, Steve, and all the friends for giving me this opportunity. It's really wonderful to be part of this safe space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baba. I really appreciate your reflections. And now we're going to hear from another colleague from the Women's Peacemaker Program who is in Fiji, and it is a little bit after 3 o'clock in the morning, I believe. So Paulo, thank you so much for being willing to interrupt your nighttime to join us for this conversation. I'm really welcome your voice here now.
Stephen, I'm not sure Paolo's going to be able to, because when I click on their name, there's no, are they speaking? There's no mic. It doesn't look like there's any mic, so I don't know that they're going to be able to speak.
Okay, well, that's unfortunate because I know he got himself up for this purpose. So, and we'll miss his voice. Paulo is a indigenous peace building practitioner, trainer and facilitator in Fiji Islands in South Pacific. He's the director of a program called Transcend Oceania, which is a peace building organization that he helped co-found. And he's been very involved since the male peace builder training in programs that engage men and boys in primary prevention work in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and he currently leads the Oceania Men and Boys Engage program, which is a response to ending violence against women and girls. And so I'm sorry that he's not here. And that will give us a little bit of time now to come back to questions and comments.
So I'm going to pick out some of the ones that have come in that we didn't get to.
Sure.
So that one question, I'll maybe do 2 or 3 again. Many activities. Is there any evidence that this has meant a decrease in the cases of discrimination against discrimination and violence against women? And another one is, why do you use the so-called masculinities instead of gender approach lens? And the next one is, can you talk about some of the challenges that you've faced in establishing these networks and in the different contexts?
Yes, thank you. Can you say the first one again?
So the first one was around how many activities there are. I'm just wondering if there's any evidence that it's actually that
Yes,
has meant a decrease in the cases of
yes,
discrimination, violence against women.
It's a great question, and this is the place where we have not had the capacity to do that kind of research, where it would require really figuring out how to measure those changes. We certainly have spoken to women afterwards, but not in a long-term way. And the women have described changes that they have witnessed, both in attitudes and behaviors, both in terms of men being more helpful around what were traditional women's activities in the home, and also men changing the way that they treated the women. But that it's a really important question. I can't point to evidence that we have that there have been those changes, and so on that front, it's uncertain. I believe that it is true that there have been changes. I also believe that those things don't change easily, and so I don't know how else to answer that one. But I appreciate the question, and it's important. The question about why the cycle of male socialization as compared to the gender lens, which in this moment, I'm not familiar, I'm not able to understand what that other piece is, because we do talk about gender a lot, and we do talk about, both the sort of the definitions of gender and how gender shows up before we get to the cycle of male socialization, which kind of narrows down the focus to this men's specific experience, which is often the topic of our training. And remind me the last question, please.
The last one is, if you could share a little bit about the challenges and the lessons learned in setting up these different networks and in different contexts.
Yes. Well, one of the challenges is how to do this work in relationship to the work that women are already doing in the community, and that needs to be done. And the challenge is, if we start to put attention on men and masculinities, are we taking attention away from the work of women's safety and empowerment? And that requires, I think, some real careful and conscious and deliberate setting up the scene. Which is why one of our principles is, right from the very beginning, engage with the women in the community who have been doing this work or have leadership roles, so that they are active participants and accountability partners in the process. Another challenge is all of the ways in which men's patterns of dominating and controlling situations get played out. And when you have women and men in the same room together, that is what does happen, and it requires a kind of setting the scene from the beginning and a constant vigilance at compassionately interrupting naming those things and interrupting those things when they happen. But it is an ongoing challenge, and it would be unrealistic to expect that just because men are showing up at a training of this nature that they're not going to even unconsciously exhibit those behaviors, and then whatever patterns of women's deferrals to men can get played out can be part of the mix. So those are the two things that come to mind immediately in terms of challenges, but I would invite others, James or others, to speak to what you see as the challenges of this training?
I think what you did was to scratch the surface about the process that we use and how it impacts the world. So it is a bigger conversation, and I also don't have much to add onto it because it's a lifelong process that we're trying to work on.
Which brings up the point that the training is often somewhere between 3 days and 2 weeks, which is a drop in the bucket in terms of a change process. And we try very hard not to be a once and done arrangement, but often we're doing a training in a particular location for a particular period of time, and then people return to their lives. And so a lot of the work at the latter part of the training is to think about how to build support systems and social structures that will help to carry on the work after the training is over.
There are other questions if none of the other speakers want to share about some of the challenges and lessons learned. Babar, did you want to?
I think I was just recalling, like, yeah, I mean, this is a challenging task. I mean, there's no question about that. And specifically when it comes to one-off kind of a training, it really becomes more challenging, and see like how it has really impacted the individual or the group as well. My experience is like, especially when I talk about the community work, actually, if there is a kind of a connection, long-term connection, for instance, with the group, and the kind of opportunities where to reflect and re-reflect and see, okay, how the process is going on, and also being a little bit patient as well. I mean, I would say, because I think it's not just kind of a, I mean, so easy kind of a thing. And so, and thirdly, I feel like, I mean, in my case, what I did, that how that group that we are working with is really a kind of a support group for each other, actually. And then to what extent they really to reach to a kind of a stage where they become a kind of a support structure for each other, basically. And in that context, I really saw a more sustained kind of a change in individuals. Just giving you one example, I think I have been working with the group for the last 5-7 years almost. I mean, the groups has really dispersed after the whole work, but still that group is in touch with each other. And at times, really, they approach us as well. I'm just kind of, if they are facing any kind of a challenges. And so I feel, so in that context, it is equally important, like not to see this whole process in a way like doing a 2-day, 3-day, or 1 week kind of a TOT, but looking at in terms of very process, not necessarily in terms of training, but how that connection can be further rebuilt and having those kind of opportunities for each other, basically. That is very, very important, and that I found it very helpful in my work.
Yeah, if I could talk about one significant challenge that we experienced at the Men's Resource Center of South Texas, and that I hear from folks who are organizing at the local level around the state of Texas, and that is really sustainability, right? Whether it's funding, whether it's developing leadership, empowering boys and young men and adult men to engage in the work, right? And that requires significant amount of training and technical assistance that did not exist in Texas at the time when I began to organize the Men's Resource Center of South Texas. And so I really looked out of the state for that kind of support, that kind of training, that kind of technical assistance. When I came to TASA 16 years ago, I wanted to create a network of support, of accountability, of training, of technical assistance for folks who are engaged at the local level, who are trying to engage boys and men around issues related to masculinities and gender-based violence prevention. And so I have been very privileged and very fortunate to be able to have the support of the coalition and the funding from the Office of the Attorney General here in Texas, here in the United States, to really support this long-term initiative. We've been engaged in this work for the last 16 years of really organizing and educating and training and supporting folks at the local level who are trying to prevent other forms of gender-based violence in their community. And so that requires a significant investment. And so what I didn't have at the time, 2 decades ago, I wanted to be able to come here at the state coalition and really create that kind of support, and that's that kind of sustainable training and empowerment and accountability. And so we have a growing network of boys and men who are engaged in this work at the local level that we support. We provide ongoing training and technical assistance related to these issues, again, that are all informed, inspired by this particular model of engaging men, of connecting with them, of empowering them, of holding them accountable. I think those, that's really key in, for us to be successful, as well as to evaluate those efforts, right? So we're trying to build systems of evaluation, of providing that kind of ongoing training and technical assistance. Now, do we have the results that we are hoping for? Like, it's going to take a significant, much more time in terms of investment of resources and funding of these initiatives to really evaluate and see what the impact long-term is. But I think, again, sustainability of these efforts, I think, are key in terms of our success here in Texas and around the globe. And so I'm just really honored to be a part of supporting and training and holding folks who are engaged in that work accountable. So yeah, thank you. That's a really important question. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective.
So I see we just have a few more minutes here before we end, and
Yes.
I'd like to
One
say
minute. 1 minute only. Yeah, just one comment. Actually,
Yes.
I mean, based on my experience again, like how this whole work is grounded, the work that is already being done with the women groups as well. First, that in our case, like if there is a kind of a resistance, and first, when we start working with the community, it's not only directly we work with men, we work with women actually. And in that case, it's very different kind of a case, because the women are coming and they're saying, okay, the work with men, how important the work with men is. Just give you one example. There was a lot of resistance, like there was a question around, like from a religious perspective. And the women's group actually approached that religious leader and said, okay, the work that is being done is very, very important for our lives, actually, basically. Therefore, we want this work should be done, actually, basically. So this is like how we place the whole work, not only from a very isolated perspective, but looking at it from a very holistic and community perspective, and grounding it from the voices that women have already raised over in that context.
Okay.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. I just to add, just to lend my voice, to say that men actually they love the training. So there's no much resistance, even though they come from a background where they are told to be a man. The patriarchal system in Africa, in Nigeria, in the part of the country where I come from, is so strong. But the moment they enter into the training, they are very willing and they are so excited. And you now see that, oh, men actually want to be compassionate. They want to show love. They don't want to be violent individuals. So I think the only challenge that we have is the issue of sustainability, which people have raised. Because the situation where maybe we just have one-off training and then, until after a long time, if you don't have support to continue with the trainings, then it means that, you keep going back. So one of the things that I will ask for is for organizations that are interested in working with women organizations or working with other people that are interested in supporting this work to, support with also funding so that the trainings can go on. These are, changing social norms is not something that you can just change in one day. It's something that takes time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ugo. So last quick thoughts. The methodology we use makes a difference. While the curriculum is intentionally simple, the methodology is complex and nuanced and highly experiential. And finally, there is a role for spirit in our training, that we haven't really talked about, but it is important to us. And that we are doing this training and the activities that we do to invoke a higher spirit in ourselves and in the people in the training, and that we can feel that together. When that happens, we feel something, and that's something that we feel is very powerful and can be motivating for change. And one of the ways that we always invoke spirit is by taking a deep breath. And so I'd like us to end together with a breath and of appreciation for the opportunity to be sitting in this giant circle together all across the world. And even if we can't look at each other right now, we know that there's all these people who are connected in this moment together in this mission and in this work. And so I want to invite you to breathe together for 1 minute while we say thank you and goodbye for now.
Great.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you to everyone for being with us.